Okay, 1 minute past 11, time to get started. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this Centre for Cities event in partnership with Legal and General, Rewriting the Green Book, which is also the name of a recent report looking at the Green Book in the context of levelling up. For such a niche and nerdy document, the government's Green Book does get a lot of flack. It's biased against the North. It rewards already successful places. It doesn't include social and environmental issues. It can't value transformational projects, to name a few. And for some, not all, but for some, it has become the biggest problem to addressing the levelling up agenda. But how much of this critique stands up to scrutiny? Is the Green Book the main obstacle to levelling up? And what can we learn from the private investment sector in terms of identifying investment opportunities that provide a blended return, not just financial, but economic, social, and environmental? These are some of the questions. I'm sure there'll be others that I hope we'll explore today with our brilliant contributors and obviously yourselves. And before we begin, as always, the event is being recorded. It'll be made available on our website along with the slides after the event. During the event, we encourage you to select speaker view for the best experience and keep your microphones on mute unless you're called to ask a question. You can tweet about the event. The hashtag is CFC Green Book. We would encourage you to do that. Opening comments will last around 25 or 30 minutes, and then we'll get some questions from you. You can submit your questions at any time during the event. You don't have to wait until our speakers have finished. And you can do this by sending your question via the chat function to ask a question. We usually ask you to ask your question yourselves. That's the way that we like to run our events. But if you'd prefer me to read them out, just let us know when you submit your question that you want me to read it rather than come to you to read it. So, and we'll be finished by 12 o'clock. So let's get started. So first up, we're going to hear from one of the report's authors, Anthony Breach, who's a senior analyst at the Centre for Cities. Anthony's going to present the main findings and recommendations from the report. And then we're going to hear from Councillor Susan Hinchcliffe, leader of Bradford City Council, chair of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and vice chair of the LGA's City and Regions Board. And after Susan, we're going to hear from Pete Gladwell. Pete is the head of public sector partnerships at Legal and General. So, Anthony, over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anthony Breach. I'm a senior analyst here at Centre for Cities. I'd like to welcome you all here today to our event on one of our most recent reports, Rewriting the Green Book for Levelling Up, which I co-authored with my colleague, Simon Jeffrey. So let's get started, shall we? So there's 4 things that I'd like you to take away from the event today, which are the main conclusions of the report. It's these 4 things up on the slide here. So the first kind of conclusion we drew is that the Green Book is not biased towards London and the South East. There's really no evidence of this in the data that's currently available. And if anything, the data would seem to suggest that there's a bias against London and the South East. The second thing is that the Green Book does not itself make decisions. It's just a tool which is only a small part of the Treasury's wider business case guidance. And we need to think about this wider business case guidance when we're thinking about the Green Book. The second is that to achieve levelling up, local government needs more resources and stronger institutions. And Manchester is a really good example of a place that has used the Green Book and shared kind of political risk and built analytical capacity to drive economic growth and investment within the city region. And everywhere should have these same abilities that Manchester currently has. And the final thing is that the government needs a national strategy to achieve levelling up. So we currently don't know what levelling up means, but if the government defined levelling up and set out a strategy to achieve it, then it would become possible to start talking about whether the levelling up agenda was being met or not. So let's dive into some of the details of the report. So as Andrew mentioned, there's been some discussion in recent years about the Green Book, and it's been subject to a fair amount of criticism, including by both kind of commentators and academics, but also by elected politicians such as the Metro Mayors as well. And this is a cross-party consensus that we can see kind of Ben Houchen, the Conservative Mayor of Tees Valley, and also the Labour Metro Mayors of Liverpool, Greater Manchester, and Sheffield, also kind of speaking out in favour of Green Book reform. Indeed, kind of Dan Jarvis kind of reiterated that earlier this week. To kind of respond to this, the Treasury has launched a Green Book review, which is looking into some of these claims and is investigating whether the Green Book needs to be rewritten. But how far do these kind of claims stack up that the Green Book is biased against the North, both in its kind of technical detail, but also in the allegation that it prevents transformational investment from taking place in the north of England? Well, from what we can see, there's really not that much evidence that the Green Book is biased against the north and towards kind of London and the southeast. I mean, the best evidence we have is from a paper by the LSE and kind of the What Works Centre, which was did an evaluation of kind of all of the kind of benefit cost ratios, which are kind of the workhorse of the kind of Green Book analysis, and found there's just no geographic pattern across the country in terms of BCRs for big kind of transport schemes, which is supposedly key to transformation investment. So there's really no evidence currently that there is a bias. There's also good reason to suspect that if there is a bias, it might actually be against London and the southeast, in that the way that the Green Book currently values time savings from transport investment uses national averages for wages to estimate the value of that time. And because wages are higher in London and the southeast, that would implicitly depress the benefits which transport investment in London and the southeast would generate, and therefore would depress the Green Book analysis for transport schemes in London and the southeast relative to the rest of the country. So there's a good reason to think that, if anything, kind of the Green Book is biased against London and the southeast. But there's kind of another critique, which is that the kind of Green Book doesn't contain a factor for kind of transformational investments, the kind of generational change in the trajectory of an economy over its lifetime. But this kind of argument really seems to stem from a misconception of what the Green Book is and how it should be used. The reality is that kind of the Green Book, and in particular benefit cost ratios, which is the subject of so much criticism, are really only a small part of the Treasury's wider business case, which is used to set out arguments and justify public investment. And BCRs and kind of the Green Book are an incredibly important part of that process, and the Green Book sets out how kind of BCRs should be conducted. But it's kind of almost like a Russian doll, that the Green Book is a very important and kind of necessary component, but it's also a very small component. And we need to be thinking about the business case as a whole, which includes not just the economic case, which the BCR and the Green Book are part of, but also the 5 separate cases which the business case as a whole includes. That includes the economic case, but it also includes the strategic case, it includes the managerial case, it includes the procurement case, and it also includes the commercial case as well. And the kind of arguments about kind of the transformational nature of schemes and the logic for investment in a particular area, that really belongs in the strategic case, and setting out what is the objective of an intervention and what is the strategy by which we mean to achieve that. We can see that many of the problems which kind of places face in acquiring additional investment actually stem from failures in the strategic case step. And we can see this most clearly in the success that Greater Manchester has had over the past decade or 2 decades in building up kind of stronger strategic cases over time. So kind of what happened with Greater Manchester was that since kind of the dissolution of the kind of metropolitan counties back in the 1980s, political leaders in Greater Manchester consistently took political risks to build strong institutions in Greater Manchester that could be trusted by governments to deliver kind of important but also risky investments within the city region. So we have the formation of AGMA, the Association of Greater Manchester Combined Authorities, in the 1980s, and that builds and builds and builds with the Greater Manchester Combined Authority later, and then followed clearly by Andy Burnham with the election of the Metro Mayor in the kind of late 2010s. Now, alongside that kind of institutional, kind of political argument which is being advanced by the local authorities, we also have kind of an expansion and development of Greater Manchester's analytical capabilities and its ability to build strong strategic cases and justifications for investment within Greater Manchester. So that starts off kind of in the mid-2000s with the Manchester Independent Economic Review, and the staff of the Greater Manchester Combined Authority continues to grow and continues to professionalise, culminating in the Greater Manchester Independent Prosperity Review, which sets out kind of a very clear case of why Manchester is so important to the national economy, but then also identifies the steps which need to be taken to further develop and grow Manchester's economy. And both these things together, kind of setting up both the political risk and the ability of institutions to deliver investment, plus the economic analytical capacity to identify the right investments in the right places, will then have actually culminated in a massive expansion of the tram network within Greater Manchester, which no other city outside of London currently has. So those institutional and those analytical aspects within local government are very important, but many places just don't have these same institutions or analytical capacity at present. So in terms of what needs to change, there's kind of separate kind of responsibilities from national government and also from local government in the reforms needed to achieve levelling up and to attract more investment into local economies. So the first thing is that national government needs a strategy to actually achieve levelling up. So we currently don't have any clear idea, even from the government almost a year after the election, of what levelling up actually means, or whether we know whether it will be achieved or not. And Centre for Cities has suggested that as an objective to know whether levelling up has been reached or not, the government should aim to kind of close 1/3 of the output gap over the next decade in the 8 biggest cities outside of London between their current performance, which is unusually low by international standards, and close 1/3 of that gap up to their potential performance, which would increase the national output across the entire economy by £16 billion a year. We then argue that to achieve this, the government should set out a kind of £100 billion levelling up fund, which should be directed towards the investments which places need to kind of actually accomplish this kind of economic change, but very much kind of set out in the strategic case for investment within places. But then also there are kind of some changes which should be made to the BCRs and to the Green Book as well. So as mentioned, there's actually currently quite poor evidence on kind of what BCRs actually are across the country. So the government should build and maintain a database for evaluating benefit cost ratios and for kind of Green Book analysis to kind of finally see once and for all whether the Green Book is biased or not. But then on local government side, local government needs more resources, but it also needs the right incentives to pursue economic growth over the longer term. So we argue that kind of Greater Manchester's capacity and incentives should be the goal in every part of England. And we set out an devolution framework published earlier this year, kind of the reforms which we would suggest to achieve that, which includes kind of a unitarization in many parts of the country, and also kind of metro mayors in kind of the biggest city regions in England. We would say that kind of the local government needs to continue to use the Green Book to make decisions, but that using those kind of extra resources and using that stronger local government capacity, much more of this BCR analysis should be done in-house, rather than it being contracted out to private consultants or being not having the ability to do it themselves. Local government should really take charge and take ownership of local investment and push that strategic agenda for investment within local places. But then over the longer term, in return for that £100 billion levelling up fund, there has to be more tax devolution and economic self-reliance. So if a city wants to bid for this £100 billion levelling up fund for a transport intervention, or a skills intervention, or a housing intervention, they should be required to put up 25% of the cost for local transport schemes in particular, to make sure that resources are being used kind of efficiently, but then also on exactly what the local leaders have identified is the local economic priority. And kind of in the end, kind of what we're saying is that the Green Book shouldn't really be a tool for the Treasury to pick between mayors, but rather that the Green Book should be a tool for mayors to pick between different projects and to help them decide what's the best way in which they can use the limited money they have in order to help the most people as possible. So thank you for listening, and I'll hand back over to Andrew now.
Thanks very much, Anthony. Just a canter through our thinking in relation to the Green Book, and I think Anthony makes an important point that I'm sure will come up in the conversation, which is we do really need to break apart the issues around where government money gets spent and the methodologies or the approaches, use whatever you want, that actually inform those decisions. And I think we think there is too much emphasis in the debate that actually people think that the Green Book fundamentally drives government investment, and we're just not really clear or convinced that that is the case. And in a sense, our worry is that an overemphasis on the Green Book becomes a distraction from some of those bigger questions about asking and requiring the government to be very, very clear about what it is that it wants to achieve through levelling up, and therefore what funding and resources are going to be made available to do that. So let's move on. So now we're going to hear from Susan. As I said, the Green Book, I think, was on the front of the front page of today's Yorkshire Post, Susan, saying reform is imminent and it's good news. So from your view, just give us your perspectives on Green Book, levelling up and the government's role in all of that.
Thank you, Andrew, for that, and thank you for inviting me to this event. So first of all, the Green Book for me is been a really significant part of what I've been tackling for the last 4 or 5 years I've been leader. And for me, it's come to symbolise the structural inequalities in UK economic development. And time and time again, I've seen us miss out, I say us as in Bradford leader, miss out from investment because I'm told that the value for money isn't as good as elsewhere in the country, and that has to change. And therefore tackling the root cause of why people think that and the values that people put on taxpayers' money is something that I've been really trying to tackle over the last few years. There's a few things in the report that I don't agree with. So there is a bit of an underestimation of local government in there. Now, from what your opening remarks there, I see obviously we need more resource and capacity, which is absolutely true. But there are a lot of skills in local government as well. They do know their places and they do produce fantastic work on a shoestring. But also in local government, there is structural inequalities in how local government is funded across the country as well. So you'll find big Mets like Bradford, 537,000 people with high levels of social need, have really suffered over the last 10 years of austerity and have not been able to invest perhaps in economic development as well as other more affluent places have been able to do. And I think that there is a lack of recognition of that structural inequality in council funding to start with that holds us back. What I do agree with is that the Green Book has been used for years now to be an excuse for civil servants and politicians not to fund infrastructure that will make transformative change in the north of England, because I don't think they realise the value of transformation and regeneration. They try and monetize it, and sometimes it's a value that's going to be found over generations to come. And railways is one thing that I talk about quite a lot. That if investment in a railway has 200 years of benefit, you know, a cost ratio, business cost ratio, that's 40 years perhaps in terms of seeing what the benefits of that are going to be. We're talking generations of change here, and that is something I think is underestimated. In Bradford, I've been pushing to get Bradford as a stop on Northern Powerhouse Rail since I became leader. And that's Northern Powerhouse Rail going from Liverpool, Manchester, through Bradford city centre and Leeds and beyond. We're the youngest city in the UK, and 140,000 children in Bradford out of 537,000 people. We all know that during COVID, young people have been really badly hit. Their life chances have been really damaged. It's a transformative change through rail investment that I think is going to make a real difference. We're also the largest city in the country, not on a mainline train line. And that, I believe, has held us back. And I do say that people have died earlier than they would have done because of that lack of economic opportunity, because of the want of a train. Now, that sounds very dramatic, but I genuinely believe it's true. And in Bradford itself, you have a 9-year gap in life expectancy between men who are born in one part of the district and men who are born in another. With women, the gap is 8 years. Child poverty is now 38%. And that was before COVID. In some parts of the district, it's 48, 49%. Those are the kind of indicators that we need to see fall, and that actually politicians need to buy into and measure so that they put the right investment in the right place. Health inequalities is holding us back as a nation, and poverty is really expensive. So even if you don't believe in the moral obligation to put health inequalities right, which I do, it is expensive. So £1 in every £5 of public sector money is spent on alleviating poverty. just imagine if we could transform communities so we didn't have poverty, we eliminated poverty, then that public sector spend is spent on other things and not just on alleviating poverty and not getting people out of it. Another thing in the report talks about skills being more important than transport. Again, I disagree with that. I think skills is very important, and I see the two things going in tandem. But if you can't get to economic opportunity, then the motivation to do skills training is actually quite limited. Again, if looking at Bradford, if you want to go to Leeds City College as a young person, it could take you an hour and a quarter, hour and a half on a bus to get from Bradford to Leeds. It's only 8 miles apart, so the transport is just not good enough to allow people to enjoy economic opportunity. So Bradford as a stop at NPR, we reckon would add 15 billion to our economy over a 40-year period. And that is something that we're obviously actively working to convince government on as they come to decisions on that major piece of infrastructure. And those decisions will be made in the next year. So they will be held to account on what their decision-making process is and what the fundamental reasoning is behind those decisions. What I cannot allow to happen is for computers to say no with the Green Book and then politicians to hide behind that. So these are really serious times. They require bold politicians to make decisions for the future of this country, not for the next just 2 or 3 years to rescue us out of COVID, but for the next 10, 20, 30, and indeed 100 years when it comes to rail investment. We need those kind of visionary politicians nationally. And levelling up has to mean something. But levelling up was already an issue for government beforehand. Now with COVID, we need double levelling up. And therefore, there need to be some really bold decisions coming out of things like the spending review in November, for example, 25th of November. I want to see some bold statements made out of that about how they're going to invest in places like Bradford and West Yorkshire. So never again do I want to be in a conversation with a civil servant nationally who says to me, Susan, what you've got to understand is that the taxpayer has got to get value for money. The people I represent are worth the investment. For every £1 that is spent in West Yorkshire, we reckon that £10 will go back into the Treasury. So I do not tell my residents and people I represent that they are not value for money. They absolutely are. Now, devolution, you talked about devolution in Manchester, obviously made a huge difference, and that we're getting that in West Yorkshire too come May next year. Manchester is 6-7 years ahead of us in that. They've had a lot of investment from London. We also now should be getting that, and we want to accelerate that, but we can't do that on our own. We have to do it with a significant additional investment from Westminster and from national government. And finally, I'd just like to say the Green Book is all well and good, but what you measure as a term of success is very significant. So I would not measure GVA and productivity. I'd measure healthy life expectancy. It is not acceptable that a woman in Bradford lives on average 22 years of her life in ill health. That is the kind of measure we need to put right, and that will lead to economic success, not just in Bradford, not just in the north, but in the whole country. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Susan. It's always lovely to have you disagree with us. You do it in a fantastically engaging way, but actually, as always, I think when the points you were making, we would agree with, I think, and there's a lot of similarity, but we can come to some of those issues in a bit more detail in the question and answer session. So let's hear from Pete Gladwell from Legal and General. Give us a view as to how the investment community thinks about, or Legal and General thinks about, where it should put its investment pound. Pete.
Thank you. Just making sure I'm off mute, so I hope you can all hear me. Thank you for the invitation to just say a few words, and really welcome any questions you might have afterwards as well, because I think the valuable bit of this will be in the discussion. I mean, it's impossible, I think, to answer your question without just understanding the role that institutions like L&G play in society, because our vision of why we invest and what we want to invest in really stems from that social role. So L&G stewards just over 8 million people's pensions and savings around the UK, and that sounds like a totally abstract number, but if I take Bradford, so that would be 95,000 people in Bradford will have entrusted their pensions and savings to L&G. And a way of thinking about that is I think the Bradford Bulls Stadium is about 5,000, so 19 times the stadium capacity of the Bradford Bulls. Imagine 19 stadiums worth of people. All of those people have put some pensions or savings with L&G. And when you think of it like that, that kind of puts the onus on us to think and work hard to see how we can invest their pensions and their savings back into their place to help improve their quality of life and drive the kind of aspirations that the students have been talking about, and the absolutely fantastic aims that I'm personally absolutely behind, both ethically and morally, around reducing child poverty, improving life expectancy, etc. So because this is 95,000 people's money in Bradford, for example, that we need to be using wisely to invest to make a difference in that place. So ironically, we're surprisingly aligned in some ways with Treasury, MHCRG, because we have, you know, huge proportion of society's capital and savings, and then what we're looking for is how do we invest it to make an impact. The number one thing I think my frustration with the Green Book is, you know, we don't have a huge Russian doll nested series of business cases, line on line and BCRs, etc. I mean, when I look back on the investments I've kind of led on that I've been most excited by, it's ones where you kind of see the place and immediately know that it could have a transformational impact on the city's economy, on people's lives. It create that kind of inclusive growth. It drives the local economy. The one theme I'm really strong and keen on is where we support a place's strengths to make them stronger. So, you know, if you take Newcastle just up the road there, the investment we made in Newcastle Helix, which is a joint venture with the council and the university, that was recognizing Newcastle has, you know, national sense of excellence in sustainability, in data, in aging, and it needed a couple of £100 million investing to create a crucible where those strengths could be self-reinforcing. You get the agglomeration effects of great cities, and that local strength in tech and startups coming out of the university can prosper and drive that inclusive growth. That really only comes about, I think, from great leadership from cities. And, you know, Manchester have been name checked a couple of times on this call, but, you know, I've mentioned people like Judith in Leeds as well, Marvin in Bristol. You know, there are some fantastic leaders in cities who have an ambition for the kind of place they want their city to be. And then we'll pick up the phone to the likes of us and say, look, here's what I want to achieve in my place. I want more affordable housing, or I want to support my tech industry, or, you know, we've got this social ambition, retrofitting homes. I need, you know, X tens of millions or hundreds of millions to help make that happen. So that leadership and ambition is a really key bit. The other two things I think I would just add is the ability to then engage with us in a very kind of open book way and a collaborative way to find the right way to address that need for investment. It may be that we loan the money. You know, we loaned Glasgow City Council £285 million last year in just a very straightforward loan. It may be there's a kind of joint venture model, the likes we've done with Newcastle. It may be that we just invest to, you know, build to fund the construction of a local tram like we've done in Cardiff. So it's working collaboratively to understand what the right model is and what the right investment model is. And then lastly, I can't stress enough that the deliverability is really important to us. And this is where L&G, you know, for all our talk of being long-term and patient, you know, if I'm very honest, we're also kind of keen to crack on with life and make a difference, you know, this year, and if not this year, certainly next year. Because we're only going to live once, and this, you know, these people's savings need to be invested to have an impact. So you know, if I take Newcastle as an example, they had the site ready, it was remediated, it was 22 acres in the centre of Newcastle. We could see a way where the capital could be invested to have an impact, and I think you'll see that as a kind of common theme in many of the investments we've made. So it's the leadership, the ambition, the collaboration, and then the opportunity to actually deliver the kind of quotes, and I hate to use the phrase shovel ready characteristic is one that's really important to us as well. But for me, you know, I would just finish on the note that we as a country, coming out of COVID, I think, again, Susan absolutely echo her thoughts, need to get this right more than ever. You know, there are lots of places up and down the country, east and west, that have been really hard hit by COVID. Many people have lost their jobs. And it's very easy to get downbeat and downcast about that. But actually, there's some serious strengths that we as a country have in green tech, the knowledge economy, and actually there's fantastic kind of local skill sets in those. And with that kind of leadership, ambition, co-creation, investment from both public sector and the likes of LNG and others. This isn't about LNG, it's about all kind of financial institutions stepping up to the plate at times like this. I'm quite upbeat about us being able to really kind of have a positive impact and drive that kind of inclusive growth that we need to see in the next few years.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Pete. I mean, loads in that as well, but I mean, certainly a takeaway around, from your perspective, thinking about deliverability as an issue in a sense that we can have the best projects in theory on paper, but actually if we don't have institutions that can make it happen at the local level and that you can partner with, they just remain good projects in theory, which picks up on a point that Susan was making around institutional capacity and devolution to get the powers and resources to the levels that we wanted to. We've had lots of questions, keep them coming in, those that haven't submitted already. For this session, or for this part, we're going to be joined by the other author of the report, Simon Jeffrey. I just wanted to come to you, Anthony, just because Susan raised this point around how we deal with, as a country and as a kind of appraisal methodologies, how we deal with the transformational element, which is that is a critique that is leveled at the Green Book, and probably rightly, but we've thought a little bit about that. So just say a little bit about what how we deal with the transformational element of government investment, and then I'll get Simon to say something about Susan's other point about the broader resources question, that we are massively in favour of local areas getting much more resources, and I'll bring Susan and Pete back in. So Anthony, just pick up that point.
Yeah, sure thing, Andrew. So we definitely agree with Susan that there's often kind of a case for a kind of transformational investment that can be made within a place. But the kind of analysis we made in the report is that often that transformational factor belongs in the strategic case within the business case, which is separate from the economic case, which is where the Green Book and the BCR sit within that Russian doll model which we produced. So, if you look at, for example, kind of Greater Manchester, kind of their expansion of the Metrolink system over the past couple of decades, that's been a real kind of transformational investment for Manchester. But a lot of the capacity and the kind of justification for that investment came through a development of the strategic case and the logic which was set out to government that such an investment could be made, that it would have transformational benefits, and that it could also be delivered on time and on budget as well. So there's really a case for that transformational logic when thinking about investment in places, but it really needs to be kind of in the right bit of the business case, and rather than within the Green Book itself. Yeah.
No, that's a great point. And I'll go slightly further and say, civil servants, when we talk to them, probably you as well, Susan, they tend to be more skeptical about that transformational element in a sense, and that's why I think they discount it quite significantly. So I think my worry in a sense is that calls to introduce more of that into the Green Book will actually retard investment going into places like Bradford and others, actually, rather than enhance it, because the skepticism only increases on civil servants. But we'll come to that in a second. Get Susan to respond. Simon, do you want to just say something about just this broader point about local government and cities getting more resources, more capacity to do the things that Susan was talking about, and our complete support for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the reasons why the challenges places face on getting economic development and being able to prepare these cases and just being able to engage with government effectively is a symptom in a lot of areas where 10 years of cuts has meant that you are really down to your statutory services, looking after the people that really need you, and actually some of that investment in your economic development teams has had to suffer, or planning teams, and where places like Greater Manchester have been able to be successful, or London can put stuff into TfL, is to maintain the teams that are focused on that development. But I think our city's outlook from the January before last really try to raise that picture of cuts to local government budgets, forcing them to pretty much take short-term decisions which are unavoidable on things that are not life and death, but really are crucial to the long-term economic health. And as you say, do feed through into life and death impacts, I think, on cities. So we are absolutely behind not only government standing behind that funding, but giving places more power to do that funding. But there's something about acting at scale, and especially on some of these larger development projects, where aggregating that across a city region does, I think, allow some of that in-house capacity to be maintained, and to take different projects across different places means that there's sort of a constant stream of work, rather than I don't think it's probably an issue in West Yorkshire as much, but this sort of feast or famine approach, and requirement to get consultants in, and the cost to that, and the impact that has on local areas to plan and coordinate investment. So something we totally agree on, and that maybe institutional reform as well as government reform would support. Great, thank you very much, Susan. We've had, come back on Anthony and Simon for certain. We've had quite a few questions on, the devolution agenda, and you obviously, West Yorkshire is about to get, the Metro Mayor in May 21. Why is, question from several people, why is that so important? What is it that that the devolution approach will bring? You referenced what was happening in Greater Manchester and other places. Why is it so critical as the next phase for for West York's development?
So I just sincerely believe that devolution helps with addressing those inequalities, those regional inequalities that many of us in the north of England have suffered from for years. And if you look across Europe, we are the most centralised country in Europe. And that means that in Germany, for example, 67 pence in every pound is spent centrally, whereas in this country, it's 95p in every pound. So we are wholly dependent on decisions made in Westminster, only 5p spent regionally. And I think that means, therefore, that the regional voice and the regional influence on those national decisions is much smaller than it should be. And therefore, that's why, and obviously, if you look at, therefore, how that pans out across Europe, 9 out of the 10 most disadvantaged areas in Europe, regions in Europe, are actually in the UK. So that it's not played out very well for us over time. So devolution gives us the power, it gives us money, but it is just a start, actually, because we need to push as mayoral combined authorities and as regional combined authorities to make sure we get more and more of that as time goes on. And that the only way that's going to work is if we have a confident government who believes in setting a framework nationally and allowing confident, capable leaders regionally to act within that framework in the best interest of their residents. If they're lacking in confidence and they hold on to the power and the money that they've got, then that's not going to work. And so we've got major departments like Department of Education, for example, yet again making national programs run from Westminster and not running those skills programs with regional combined authorities. And that's a real mistake and really disappoints me, because I think we should all now be on this progress towards devolution, greater power for regions, because it just makes economic sense and reduces those inequalities, which actually in the long term cost us so much as an economy.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Great points again. Pete, we've had several questions in the sort of public investment, private investment, kind of leverage sort of space, questions about, because of the Green Book approach, actually, if you can attract more private investment, that gets you a better score, as it were. Does that advantage better, places that can leverage that investment? That's a question. But we've also had one from Sophia. Is Sophia on the? I don't have your surname, but you asked about where LNG is funding and financing, and is it in the context of public? Are you on the call, Sophia? If not, I'll read out your question. But if you are, if you can unmute and ask your question, that would be great.
Hi, thank you, Andrew. I was just wondering, I was just curious to understand how much of LNG finance is in the context of committed public funding, such as, ERDF, but, other local growth funds, and the role of public funding in actually reducing market risk and therefore, increasing public sector investment, and possibly something that, value for money isn't, great at picking up on?
Great question. Pete, do you want to take that one on?
Yeah, so I mean, we tend to start with the assumption that there won't be much grant, or there won't be any grant, really, to be frank. And then sometimes when you work through the investment models and, as I say, you kind of have that co-creation piece around, well, how we're going to bring this forward together. There is clearly a shortfall, and that will vary from place to place. That will vary from site to site, from scheme to scheme. And then, so I'm not for a moment, and just to be abundantly clear, taking some kind of messianic view that says if only everyone attracted investment from LNG, we could do everything. There is absolutely one role that we have to play. There's a role that grant has to play. There's actually a role that we as a country hugely underplay, which is the role of the underwrite or the guarantee, because that fundamentally reduces the returns that we need to make as an investor. And so it's a very powerful tool for improving viability, because if you need to make a lower return as an investor, you can actually generally invest more, or projects become more viable. So that's a hugely important role. And then the one that I think the reports highlights, and Susan's kind of highlighted, that's maybe a little bit overdone, but it is still critical from my perspective, is this whole skills and training piece. And we can invest in fantastic schemes and create these catalysts for growth, but if we haven't got the skills and training locally as well, and that might be provided by public money, and incidentally, almost definitely it's a revenue cost, it's not a capital investment, it's a revenue need, then the social impact of our investment will be limited, and we won't achieve everything as a place and as a country that we could achieve. So it's the best leaders locally, in my personal experience, draw on all of those threads. They don't use just one. They don't just keep turning up at the government and say, hi, I'd like another £1 billion, please, because that is not the only tool in the armory, but they're kind of working on all of those, bringing them together to help support that place's growth and drive that inclusive and environmentally sustainable economy that we're looking for.
And I think that's what Susan was saying, in a sense. It's not one thing or the other, or it's actually the ability to think about those two things, and those two things plus other things, and bring them together, which is actually can only really be done at that sort of place, at that place scale, because doing that at national government scale, we know is an extraordinarily difficult thing for them to do. Yeah. Okay. Let's take a question from Jeevan Jones from Birmingham. Jeevan, are you on the call? You've got a question about the degree to which we should be following principles and leadership. Jeevan, over to you. Ask your question.
Hey, thank you, Andrew. I hope you can hear me.
We can.
Great. So my question was, can the regional angle ever be properly quantified in impact assessments? Or are we really saying that decision makers should be using principles to decide between options? Because it sounds, particularly the things that Susan mentioned, we're really talking about principles here rather than quantified numbers. So should you be using those principles when deciding rather than numbers? And the final point I made was, would some decision makers argue they do that already when making decisions? They don't just follow the numbers, they already use some of this judgment.
Yeah, so clarity on, thank you very much. Clarity on, the ability to monetize everything, which is a tendency in kind of modern appraisal methodologies, has its limits. And in part, the Green Book, I think, the worry is that we try to monetize everything. Actually, that undermines what we're trying to achieve rather than actually strengthens it. But Susan, the quantifiable, the unquantifiable, the principles rather than the full detail. I mean, that's partly what devolution would offer you, right? In a sense, is a package of X to deploy in the way that you know your place best. Susan.
Yes, I mean, it's a fundamental question, isn't it, around politics, to be quite honest, and how much politicians have an influence over a decision. And therefore, it's very important who you vote for. Because it's an argument, therefore, between free market economy, which I, as a Labour politician, don't agree with, or an economy where you intervene to get the widest benefit for the widest number of people and inclusive growth. And that's where I am, of course. So my worry with the Green Book is that it provides too much ammunition for free market economists to do what they want it to do anyway, and provides them with cover to do that. and therefore I do think it should be about what we want to see this country be in the future. We're going into a massively changed time. Brexit has redefined what we think about ourselves as a nation. I don't think we've had that conversation yet about what nation do we want to be in the future. And I would like us to be a more equal society where there's a safety net of welfare, which gets people a start in life so they can get back on their feet and then supports them to get further up the pay scale. I don't think we have that as a nation. I don't think we've had that for a very long time as a nation. But that's what I'd like to see. So I think we need to have a conversation as a nation about what do we want, what is the UK going to be like in the future? What is it we're looking for? And for me, I say health inequalities should be a key measure behind all those decisions. What is the health inequalities in this country and how's that going to reduce?
Yeah, no, great. Okay, I'll come to you in a second, Pete, between the boundary between monetary and non-monetary. Obviously, you're an institutional investor, so this is a very sharp question for you and for your institution. But part of what we're recommending is actually to create stronger boundaries for the Green Book as to where it shouldn't go as much as where it should go. So just say something on that.
Yeah, sure thing. So one of the findings of the Green Book report was that certainly if you ask practitioners, there's a sense that Green Book analysis is getting very, very complicated, such that the confidence people have in some of the ultra complex and ultra detailed impacts which certain schemes will have is a bit fishy. And we argue that we should have like a simpler, kind of cleaner Green Book analysis which sets out these are the quantifiable benefits, this is what you can count. But then, there are other non-quantifiable things which you can't count or are much more difficult to count, which can be discussed and which can be argued for. Some of those should belong in the strategic case, but are also, can be set out in paradoxically what's called kind of the value for money case as well. So those non-quantifiable elements are important. But we'd also kind of definitely agree with Susan that ultimately a lot of this kind of debate about principles is political. And certainly, one of the arguments we make for kind of tax devolution is that so that these debates about principles can be shifted from kind of a civil servant's office down to the democratic political contest within local government, so that voters within West Yorkshire or within London or within Greater Manchester can have a say about, okay, what are the principles that we want to really inform the choices that politicians make with our money, and how should politicians go about achieving those. So I think it's totally compatible to think about kind of a simpler and cleaner Green Book, tax devolution, and this discussion about principles as well.
Great. Pete, can you just give us an insight, that sort of monetary, non-monetary, and how you deal with that in making your decisions where to invest?
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you a really kind of live example. So last year we funded 250 homes for homeless families to help a local authority take these families out of B&Bs and put them into stable home addresses. And, financially, that works for us. We can use the income from these homes to pay people's pensions. So, box ticked, it's a good investment for us financially. Socially, this is the absolute crux of it. We did not get some consultants to go and redact the impact we had to pounds and pence. It wasn't like we asked some consultants to kind of go around the 250 families who are now, whose kids now have a kitchen table to do homework on, and you have a stable address to apply for jobs, and try to reduce that impact we were having in people's lives down to pounds and pence. Because fundamentally, I think what we're all arguing here is pounds and pence are not the most important thing in life. That's, I think, what Susan means. That I think that's what you guys agree to believe. That's what I believe as well. So there is a real danger, particularly with big top-down structures, that we try to reduce the impact of people on people's lives and families' lives to just the number, to pounds and pence. And what that really says actually is fundamentally in our heart of hearts, that's what's most important to us as an industry. So yeah, for me, I would always resist it. It doesn't mean we don't care about social impact. It just means we care about it too much to reduce it to financial numbers alone. And I do think that some of you guys picked up in your report, and it's a genuine risk. There's obviously still kind of questions around political input as well, which that we've seen with the Towns Fund, for example. But so it's not fail-safe either. But it can't just be about numbers in a spreadsheet.
Brilliant. Excellent. Thank you very much. We've had a question in from from Susan. She doesn't give a surname. I assume it's not you, Susan, that's done this, but nevertheless, it's a good question. So I'll come to you first. It's in relation to to the levelling up objective of the government, and it's really, it says, how important is it that the government sets out what it means by levelling up, and in a sense what it's trying to achieve. We have these kind of warm words and aspirations, but not much more beyond that. So Susan's kind of asking, how important is it that the government is clear about the strategy that it wants to, it wants to achieve over the next X period? Susan, your reflections on that?
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. I didn't ask the question, but I think it is a very good point that they do need to say what it means, because my worry now is post-COVID, and there will be a post-COVID, they will see it as something to level up to pre-COVID. And actually, many of us, Pete talked about a lot of core cities then, but many non-core cities, we're already feeling left behind. Yeah. And therefore, there needs to be a huge effort to address those inequalities in this nation. And they need to say what that is. As I said, for me, it's about narrowing the gap in health inequalities. What are their measures of success going to be when it comes to levelling up? Only they can say what that is. I've got my answer, but they need to say, perhaps at the spending review on 25th of November, what their intentions regarding that are.
Great. And Pete, from an investment perspective, how important is it, for you to be clear about what the government is trying to achieve, so you can align, your own investment decisions that, that are responding to what the government's trying to achieve or not? I mean, how significant is that for you?
It's significant. And as I've said, sometimes these projects require central government, involvement as well. But I'm a big believer that we make our own destiny in these things. And, we recent investments made Sunderland, Sheffield, Newcastle, Cardiff. You'll note these aren't London. It's places who have that vision and that drive and that deliverability. But as I say, it is important. It's an important element. But I think there is a risk that we as places can just say, oh, we can't do it without central government. If we don't get central government, we've got no hope. And I suppose my argument is that there's still a lot we can do together to improve people's lives that would be enhanced by central government, but is not the only kind of be all and end all in it.
Yeah, Simon, we talk a lot about leveling up and the need for clarity. Just say a little bit more about about that and why that's important for the government to to set out what it's trying to do.
Well, I think just like L&G have to consider what is going to be a successful, or might be impacted by government's plans. And I think local areas need to have an idea of what they're trying to achieve. If the government doesn't have a clear picture of exactly the outcomes it wants, then I don't think places are going to be able to figure out what, whether that's the inputs or the policies that can do that. But if it doesn't have that, then government's going to get trapped into, getting involved in every project and thinking about how does it do it, but without telling anyone what's the eventual aim. So you have this situation where local government is constantly having to interact with central government over what it can do, whether it can get the money for it, and it doesn't know what the answer is. I think for government to use its money effectively to deliver on levelling up, set the outcome, and then let places who've got the institutional capacity get on and do it. If that is a transport project, if that is a skills project, but accountability somewhere down the line, you'd say would be either maybe the gateway reviews that some metro mayors have, but I think more effectively would be slowly transitioning from the grant funding for the place to do this towards a form of tax fiscal devolution, so that whether you've achieved it is, are more people in work, are people healthier for longer and being able to work more, to have be able to take part in the community life, that kids are doing better at school and feeding through there. GDP is not the final answer, but I do struggle to find a better score a long way down the line for a lot that you could use to try and figure out what is going on with levelling up. The government needs to set the destination, but realise it doesn't have the knowledge or the capacity to deliver that in places.
Yeah, Susan, can you? I mean, just on that and the sort of the pushing of the devolution agenda. I mean, where does you talked about the 67 pence and the the 95 pence comparisons, Germany to England. I mean, where is the sort of getting hold of your tax base, as it were, and getting hold of tax revenues? As how important is that in your mind to the future for both Bradford and obviously for West Yorks as well?
So I think I need to make clear that I think all local places are willing to invest in their place.
Yeah.
You know, it's just our capacity to be able to do that, to get those tax revenues that the taxpayer, that the government wants. So I think the role for government is funding the viability gap, so that there is a levelling up, there is an equal investment framework for people like Pete to invest in. And I think that's where government should be. That is the role of the state, to intervene where markets aren't working as well as they are in other places. And that's exactly where they should be. There shouldn't be any question about that. So what I don't want is for government, and unfortunately, frequently I feel civil servants do, they treat it as a business, government. They have to get a return on their investment. Well, that's more like Pete should be in, because obviously that's illegal in general, that's a business. But the government is the government. The whole role of government is to intervene for the greatest good of the people. So that's the role they should play.
Yeah.
Yes, tax revenue is important, and it will come if we enable people to have opportunities and to earn to their full potential.
Yeah, no, it seems like on occasions the government acts more like a business, and some businesses, L&G, act more like the government. Pete, I mean, your reflection, how have we got to this position? You know, where you're taking a broader perspective, or at least in theory, taking a broader perspective than than maybe some colleagues in Whitehall.
I don't know if I could comment on that one beyond just saying. It comes back to social role for me. Our role is to invest the nation's savings and pensions to try and improve people's, health outcomes, grow the economy. I think it comes down to, if your colleague mentioned it, I think a really critical point, which is when you're trying to make a big top-down decision, you revert to a spreadsheet. If you're there, there's no devolution, and you're just saying, right, I've got this huge pot. Then, what are my indicators? And you can already, I studied computer science, so you can already see how you put your spreadsheet together, and then you're down that path, rather than thinking about the kind of real transformational qualitative impacts. I think we're all arguing are easily as important, if not more important.
Yeah, that's good. And Susan, just a final word from you. You referenced there, the spending review, which we're due to get. Obviously, that's a 1 year rather than the 3 year we were promised, but it does seem to be that resource revenue or resource decisions will be 1 year, but there will be something in there around multi-year, particularly related to capital projects. I mean, what would you be looking for, or what are you looking for in the spending review statement that gives us some sense that the levelling up agenda is progressing?
So I'm looking for a signal about economic recovery and how that's going to start coming through with funding through that. So we in West Yorkshire have got a West Yorkshire Economic Recovery Plan. There is a price tag to it, Pete, I'm afraid, which is 1.4 billion. But we'd put our own money in as well. But obviously, this is all about levelling up and all about giving the government what they want. So I want to see a down payment on that, to be quite honest. Because as a government, they need to provide hope. It's not just about rescuing the economy. It's about looking forward to how we're going to re-establish an economy along the lines that people want, which is good growth, green growth. People need hope, and it's a role of a government and local government to deliver that.
Fantastic. A great way to end. It's nearly 12 o'clock, so I'm sure we could carry on and on and on, but unfortunately we can't. You'll find the report, Rewriting the Green Book, as well as a short podcast on our website, centreforcities.org. I'd like to thank Anthony and then Simon for the presentation and then panel comments. But as always, huge thanks to Susan for coming and sharing the thoughts, and for very politely disagreeing with us. It's always a pleasure to be disagreed with when you do it, Susan. So I thank you for doing that, and indeed, Pete, your contributions and kind of insights from a slightly different perspective, but actually bringing many of those issues together. And obviously, Legal in General have partnered with us on this event, and indeed the work that we've been doing on the Green Book. So we're hugely appreciative to them more generally. So thank you all for your participation. As always, my final thanks is to everyone that joined. Thank you for coming. Hope you found it useful. The conversation undoubtedly will carry on. But until the next time, take care. Thanks very much.